Hi everyone, I bring good news for the rogues in Season 4. They're actually a bit better than we thought, and I already touched on this briefly in another video, but I want to go more into detail about it. Namely, that there are some new tempering options that make the rogues generally a bit better than we thought compared to other classes and compared to other builds. So what I mean is that previously when I was fear crafting all those builds here for Season 4, this is my planner channel, for example, from the builds that I made, and most of those I want to play. Well, it turns out there were some options that Blizzard has added in Season 4 launch that weren't possible before on the PTR. Namely, vulnerable damage and crit damage on tempering. So on the offensive slot, there is the Cutthroat Finesse recipe that has vulnerable damage. And vulnerable damage is like the most important stat for victimized rogues, which is one of the strongest archetypes on the class right now, with the Heartseeker build, possibly the Shadowstep build, Handshot build. So there's a bunch of stuff that uses this, and you can now just get vulnerable damage. On the PTR, I believe this used to be just cutthroat damage or something like that, and for some reason they converted this to vulnerable damage, so that's kind of nice. And likewise, we have the Marksman Finesse. This has critical strike damage, which is very good for precision rogues. So any ranged rogue that is not already a victimized build can also run this instead and benefit from this critical strike damage. On the PTR, again, this used to be, I think, marksman specific critical strike damage, which did not work with the precision key passive. So we have two of the main rogue archetypes buffed by those stats directly, because we have this here that scales with vulnerable, and we have precision that scales with crit damage. And now you can just get a lot more of it. And in addition, you can also move your stats around a little bit to just roll other stats on your gear. Instead of trying to get as much vulnerable damage as you can, you just temper the vulnerable damage and get something else instead. Previously, we had to rely on some stuff like damage per combo point spent or something like that, which wasn't really all that great for the rogues. It was okay, but it was all just additive damage. But here we get a juicy chunk of additive damage, and on top of this, we get some extra multiplicative value out of it, because this is like the main stat that you want to get here on these builds. So that's really nice. I tried to do a bit of napkin math about this, and I would say that it probably buffs each precision or victimized build of somewhere in the range of like 20 to 30% DPS, just like that, by tempering those mods instead of trying to put them on your gear. So that's actually really nice news, to be honest. It doesn't really help the melee builds, because damage to crowd controlled enemies was already an option. So if you're playing close quarters combat, that once damage was crowd controlled, which we have here on natural finesse, this was actually unchanged. Damage to crowd controlled enemies is what you want here for this key passive. And this also helps a lot for the melee rogues, but at least judging from what we've played on the PTR, I've played some Twisting Blades there, I've played some other stuff with close quarters combat, you don't really scale it as high as some of those victimize and precision builds. So range is kind of like the name of the game. I guess the only exception here is the Shadowstep Rogue, but we'll also have to wait and see if that is actually popping off as much as we expected. But for melee rogues, Twisting Blades, and so on, close quarters combat, it does go higher than before, just because those numbers are higher now on damage versus crowd controlled, but you don't get any extra value compared to what we expected already from the PTR going into live server. What it also means is that momentum is basically completely dead. There's like no reason to run this. Like energy regeneration is easy to get, movement speed is easy to get, and just 20% damage reduction doesn't cut it for using this. Even with the momentum aspect to get some more toughness, you do have other options to get extra defense, so I wouldn't go for that. And exposure, I mean, we do have the Death Trap build. I fully updated the max roll guide there to this Poison Barrage Death Trap build that I also made a video about already. So that is still a thing for certain builds, or maybe like a Flurry Grenade build or something like that could use this. But for the most part, it's actually those two key passives that kind of dominate everything on the Rogue now, even more so than we thought because of those tempering changes. But we can see this in action also in the pit, for example. Here, I just took my Barrage Rogue that is not optimized. I have barely any greater affixes and so on, like masterworked my gear to 4 or so. And I can already like cruise for those tier 70 plus. This is like a 76 here that I've cleared in like, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes or something like that. And well, the damage is definitely there once you have those crit damage tempers, those vulnerable damage tempers, depending on the build. And it just turns out it works better than we thought. So that's kind of cool stuff. I hope that Blizzard is also gonna take some note about the state of melee rogues these days, which are just not really in the same spot as the ranged rogues. And maybe can get a bit of like a rebalance there in the next season or the mid-season update. and see if they can bring that up a little bit. Rogues in general are the weakest class, I would say, maybe like a bit elevated now and on the same level as Zorks, which are also not super powerful. They're just kind of like good overall and really fast in late game, but they don't have like this crazy damage output that, for example, Barbs and Necros do. And also Druids are really up there. So there's definitely a bit of a gap between the top 3 and the bottom 2 classes, I would say. But it's not like Rogue is terrible, and especially now we get like this free power basically from the patch, which is nice. So I just wanted to draw some attention to this because a lot of people thought that rogues are kind of terrible and they don't really work and whatever. I had a blast of rogues so far. There's a bunch of builds that I really enjoyed playing already. I've tried Pen Shot with Victimize, I've tried Barrage, as you can see here, I've tried Rapid Fire, and I'm currently working on Heartseeker, so there's a lot of stuff going on. And I also want to try to make that Shadow Step build work when I can. So that's what I have planned for now. And later in the season, I also want to make the Poison Barrage and the Twisting Blades. So lots of cool stuff here going on the rogues, and you can stay tuned for a lot more guides. Anyway, that's it already for this update. I just wanted to break down what actually came out of this change that was unexpectedly just in the live patch, and a lot of people asked me about it, so here you are. It's a pretty decent buff for some of the rogue builds. So hope you enjoyed this little breakdown here, and wish you good luck with your rogue. Hope you enjoy season 4, and see you guys next time.